If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. Let's continue. Thursday night fell over London like a heavy cloak of lights and movement. The avenues pulsed with heavy traffic, and among the thousands of cars vying for space on the asphalt, a luxury black sedan sped forward. At the wheel, Richard Alistair clenched his fingers against the leather steering wheel, his jaw tight and his eyes fixed on the road ahead. At 42, he was the kind of man who never admitted failure. Founder and CEO of one of the country's largest tech companies, Richard had built an empire based on intelligence, determination, and a routine that left no room for error. But that night, he had made an unforgivable slip-up. He had forgotten his cell phone at home. And on a night when he needed to close an £8 million investment with American investors. The video conference was scheduled for 9 o'clock, and he had exactly 40 minutes to get home, grab the device, and return to the office. Frustration burned within him like live embers. How could he have been so careless? He, who controlled every detail, every number, every decision with surgical precision. Richard made a sharp U-turn on Oxford Street, ignoring the irritated honk of a driver next to him. He had no time for pleasantries. His mind was already calculating the minutes, the seconds, the fastest route. But while his hands guided the car automatically, another heavier thought occupied his chest. A thought he tried to push away every day, but which always returned, especially in moments of silence. Michael, his son, 4 years old, light brown hair, green eyes like his mother's. A child who should be running around the house, laughing, playing, filling the rooms with that infinite energy that only children possess. But Michael wasn't like that. Not anymore. Since Beatrice had passed away 2 years ago, the boy had become a shadow of himself. The loss had been abrupt, unexpected, too painful for such a small heart to process, and Richard knew it had been too painful for him too. In the first few months, he had tried to be both father and mother. He had tried to compensate for the absence with his presence, but work always pulled, always demanded, always consumed, and little by little, without realizing, Richard began to distance himself, not physically as he still slept under the same roof as his son, but emotionally, spiritually. He had built a wall around his own heart. It was easier to dive into spreadsheets, meetings, contracts, than to face those little green eyes that asked for something he didn't know how to give. 15 caregivers. That was the exact number. 15 different women had passed through Michael's life in the last 2 years, all qualified, all well recommended, all with proven experience, and all had given up. The boy cried non-stop, screamed when they tried to touch. Him bit, pushed, broke objects. He had tantrums that lasted for hours, tantrums that left the professionals exhausted and at a loss for what to do. The last caregiver had left only 3 days ago, in tears, saying it was beyond her strength. Richard gripped the steering wheel even tighter. He didn't blame his son. How could he? Michael was just a child trying to deal with a pain that even adults struggled to process. But at the same time, Richard felt completely helpless. Each caregiver who left was another failure, another proof that he couldn't even manage to hire someone capable of helping his own son. The new caregiver was scheduled to start the next day, Friday morning. He had hired her more out of desperation than conviction. The woman had no academic background in pedagogy or child psychology. She had no extensive resume nor impressive references. In fact, all she had was a recommendation from Teresa, Richard's secretary, who knew the young woman from the neighborhood where she grew up in East London. Amanda Clark, 26 years old. Simple, Teresa had said, but with a special gift for dealing with children. Richard didn't put much stock in gifts or intuition. He believed in results, proven methods, science. But after 15 failures, he was willing to try anything, even if it meant hiring a young woman without a degree who lived in a humble neighborhood and commuted to work by bus. The automatic gate of the house opened when Richard activated the remote control. The residence was in a gated community in Hampstead, an affluent neighborhood surrounded by trees and security. The house was spacious, modern, with enormous glass panes that reflected the city lights. It had a pool, a garden, a barbecue area, 3 suites, and a living room as large as some entire apartments. But despite all that luxury, the house seemed empty, cold, too silent. Richard parked the car in the garage and entered through the side door, which led directly to the kitchen. His footsteps were cautious, almost stealthy. He had learned the hard way that any unexpected noise could trigger a crisis in his son. The sound of a door slamming, the clinking of falling keys, even a raised voice could turn Michael into a hurricane of screams and tears. But when Richard crossed the kitchen and entered the living room, something strange happened. Silence. A deep, complete, almost palpable silence. It wasn't the tense, heavy silence that usually dominated the house, that silence that precedes an explosion. It was a different kind of silence, tranquil, almost peaceful. Richard frowned. Michael should be alone at home at that moment. The neighbor, Mrs. Martha, a retired lady who lived next door, had promised to keep an eye out for a few hours, but she only observed from a distance through the window. The boy usually spent his nights locked in his own room, refusing to come out, refusing to eat, refusing to speak. Richard expected to find exactly that, a dark house, a closed room, the heavy silence of solitude. But there was light. A soft, yellowish light came from the corridor leading to the bedrooms, and along with the light there was something else. A smell. The smell of cake. Chocolate cake. When was the last time that kitchen had been used for anything other than heating frozen food? Richard walked slowly down the corridor, his heart quickening without knowing why. He approached Michael's bedroom door, which was ajar, and then he stopped. He stopped and simply stood there, motionless, hand in the air, unable to process what he saw. Michael was sleeping. He wasn't awake, screaming, crying, destroying toys. He was sleeping. And he wasn't alone. A young woman was sitting in the chair beside the bed, with the boy nestled in her lap. Her arms wrapped around his small body with a delicacy that seemed almost reverent. Michael's head rested on her shoulder, his breathing slow and deep, his lips slightly parted, his cheeks flushed with peaceful sleep. One of his little arms was wrapped around the young woman's neck, as if even in sleep he didn't want to let go of her. The young woman also seemed to be dozing, her head slightly tilted to the side, her eyes closed. She wore a simple outfit, faded jeans and a white cotton blouse. Her brown hair was tied in a loose ponytail, some strands escaping and falling over her face. She wore no makeup, no jewelry. There was nothing extraordinary about her appearance, and yet there, in that moment, holding his son as if he were the most precious thing in the world, she seemed to radiate something Richard couldn't name. He swallowed hard, still unable to move. The room was different, completely different. The toys, which usually lay scattered chaotically on the floor, were organized. Toy cars lined up on a shelf, building blocks stored in colorful boxes, children's books stacked on the small table, and on the walls there were drawings made with crayons taped to the walls, drawings of houses, of trees, of yellow suns and blue skies, drawings Michael hadn't made in months. On the small table next to the books there was a plate with cake crumbs and an empty glass of milk. Michael had eaten. When was the last time he had eaten without crying, without spitting, without refusing every spoonful as if it were poison? Richard felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't just surprise. It was something deeper, more painful. It was the sudden awareness of everything he had lost, of all the moments he hadn't been there, of all the nights he had left his son alone facing his demons while he, Richard, was holed up in the office, pretending that the numbers on the computer screens were more important than that little broken heart. He backed away slowly without making a sound. He didn't have the courage to interrupt that moment. He had no right. He returned to the living room, his steps slow, his mind muddled. He found his cell phone on the kitchen counter, exactly where he had left it that morning. He picked it up, looked at the screen that showed 6 missed calls and 12 urgent messages. He took a deep breath, and then he went back to the car. The video conference with the American investors lasted 2 hours. Richard was physically present, sitting in the black leather chair in his office, the camera perfectly framed, the professional setting in the background, but mentally he was far away, very far away. Every time one of the investors talked about growth projections, about return rates, about expansion strategies, Richard saw the image of his son sleeping in the unknown young woman's lap. He saw the drawings on the walls. He saw the empty plate. He saw something he could no longer reach. At 11 o'clock that night, he finally managed to end the meeting. The deal was closed. £8 million secured. It was a victory. He should have been celebrating. But all he felt was an immense emptiness, as if he had won an insignificant battle while losing a much greater war. When he returned home, it was already past midnight. This time he entered without fear of making noise. He went straight to his son's room. The door was closed now. He opened it carefully and found Michael sleeping alone, wrapped in his dinosaur print duvet. But there was something new there. A brown teddy bear with a red ribbon around its neck. Richard frowned. That teddy bear hadn't been there before. Where had it come from? He left the room and found the young woman in the living room, folding clean clothes that she must have washed herself. She looked up when she saw him arrive and immediately stood up, as if she had been caught doing something wrong. Richard stopped a few steps away, not knowing exactly what to say. She also remained silent, waiting. For a few seconds they just stared at each other, he trying to understand who this person was who had achieved the impossible, she probably trying to guess if she was about to be fired for arriving a day earlier than agreed. It was Richard who broke the silence. "You're Amanda Clark." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. She nodded, her eyes downcast, her hand still holding a folded child's t-shirt. "Yes, sir. I apologize for coming earlier than agreed. Mrs. Teresa called me saying you needed urgent help, and I didn't want to leave the boy alone, so—" Her voice was soft but firm. There was humility there, but not weak submission. It was the kind of humility that comes from knowing who you are, without needing to diminish yourself for others. Richard took a deep breath. He wanted to ask so many things. He wanted to understand how she had done it. How she had calmed a child no one could touch. How she had transformed a chaotic room into a welcoming space. How she had managed to make Michael eat, draw, sleep peacefully. But the words wouldn't come. They were stuck in his throat, mixed with something he didn't want to name. "He's sleeping," was all he managed to say. Amanda smiled, a small, almost shy smile, but one that lit up her face in an unexpected way. "Yes. He was very scared when I arrived. He said there were monsters under the bed, so we made an anti-monster potion." Richard blinked. A potion?" She nodded as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Orange juice with honey and a little vanilla. I put it in a pretty little bottle and told him it was magic, that no monster would be able to stay near after he drank it. He believed it, and he slept." Richard was silent, processing that. An anti-monster potion, something so simple, so ridiculous. And yet it had worked. Because what Michael needed wasn't logic, wasn't science, wasn't rational explanations. He needed someone to enter his world, to validate his fears, to offer solutions, in a language a 4-year-old could understand. "And you did those drawings with him?" Amanda shook her head. "He did them alone. I just gave him the materials and sat beside him. He wanted to draw his mother, so we drew together. I told him she was in heaven, watching over him, sending love and protection every day. He cried a little, but then he smiled. He said he wanted to make a beautiful drawing for her to see." Richard felt something break inside him, something hard, compacted, that he had kept locked away for so long that he no longer remembered it was there. He turned his face, pretending to look out the window, but in reality trying to hide the moist sheen that insisted on appearing in his eyes. When he turned back, Amanda was observing him with an expression he couldn't decipher. It wasn't pity, it wasn't judgment. Perhaps it was understanding. "You must be tired," she said softly. "I'll finish tidying these clothes, and then I'll leave. I'll be back early tomorrow if you still want me to stay." The word came out before Richard could think. Amanda blinked, surprised. "What?" "Stay. Here. Tonight. There's a guest room upstairs. You can sleep there. And tomorrow we'll talk about everything." She hesitated, clearly unsure, but then she nodded. "All right. Richard went upstairs to his own room without saying anything else. He closed the door behind him and stood there in the dark, hearing only the sound of his own breathing. For the first time in 2 years, something inside him began to awaken. Something small, fragile, but persistent. A flicker of hope, a spark of possibility, the faint, almost unreal feeling that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't lost everything. That night, Richard slept poorly. He had confused, fragmented dreams where Beatrice appeared and disappeared like smoke, where Michael cried and he couldn't reach him, where a soft light illuminated a path he didn't know how to follow. He woke up several times, sweating, his heart racing, until he finally gave up on sleeping and sat on the bed waiting for dawn. When the sun finally broke the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Richard slowly descended the stairs. The house was silent. For a moment he thought he had dreamed everything, that Amanda didn't exist, that Michael was still locked in, his room alone, lost in his own nightmares. But then he heard it. Laughter, a child's laughter, crystal clear, full of life. It came from the kitchen. Richard stopped in the middle of the corridor, paralyzed. How long had it been since he last heard that sound? Months? A year? More? He walked slowly to the kitchen and stopped at the door, observing the scene before him as if watching a movie. Amanda was by the stove, making pancakes. She wore the apron Beatrice used to wear, and her movements were gentle, competent, natural. And beside her, sitting on a high stool, was Michael. He wasn't crying, he wasn't screaming, he was smiling, truly smiling, his eyes sparkling, his cheeks flushed, his little legs swinging in the air. "Aunt Amanda promised I could help flip the pancake," he said, excited. "She said I'm a very good helper." Amanda smiled and lovingly ruffled the boy's hair. "The best helper in the world. Without you, I couldn't make these delicious pancakes." Michael laughed again, and then he turned his head and saw his father standing at the door. For a second, Richard feared the smile would disappear, that the boy would withdraw, as he always did. But no. Michael stretched his little arms towards him, his eyes still shining. "Daddy, Aunt Amanda is making pancakes. Do you want some too?" Richard felt his legs give way. He approached slowly, as if afraid of breaking the spell. He knelt beside the stool where his son was sitting and, for the first time in so long, Michael leaned in and hugged him. A real hug. Tight, warm, alive. Richard closed his eyes and held his son against his chest, feeling the little heart beating fast against his own. And there in that kitchen, bathed in morning light, with the smell of pancakes in the air and the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the walls, he understood something fundamental, something that would change everything from then on. He hadn't lost his son, but he had almost lost him. And now, in some mysterious, incomprehensible way, thanks to an unknown young woman who had appeared in his life in the most improbable way possible, he was getting a second chance, a chance to be a real father, a chance to rebuild what was broken, a chance to learn that life was not just about contracts and numbers, but about small, precious moments that once lost never come back. And he wasn't going to waste this chance. Not this time. The following days unfolded like a delicate dance, where each step needed to be measured, each movement calculated but at the same time genuine. Richard observed from afar, still unsure how to approach, while Amanda moved through the house with a naturalness he envied. She seemed to know exactly when to speak and when to be silent, when to hold Michael in her lap and when to let him explore alone, when to be firm and when to be gentle. It was as if she possessed an invisible map of that child's heart, a map that all the others had failed to find. On Saturday morning, Richard woke up earlier than usual. Generally on weekends he would sleep in, catching up on lost sleep during the week. But this time something pulled him out of bed even before the sun was fully up. He went downstairs in his bathrobe and slippers, rubbing his sleepy eyes, guided by the smell of fresh coffee. Amanda was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast. She wore the same, simple outfit from the day before, but seemed rested, alert, ready for another day. When she saw him enter, she smiled with that same delicacy he was beginning to recognize. "Good morning, Mr. Alistair. Coffee's almost ready. Do you prefer scrambled or fried eggs?" Richard blinked, still not fully awake. I don't usually eat breakfast. Just coffee. Black, no sugar. Amanda made a face that clearly indicated her opinion of that habit, but said nothing. She poured a large cup of coffee and placed it on the kitchen table, along with a basket of fresh bread, butter, strawberry jam, cheese and ham. Richard sat down, holding the cup between his hands, feeling the comforting warmth of the steaming liquid. "Is Michael still sleeping?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "He is. He stayed up late yesterday because he wanted to finish a puzzle, but he slept well. No nightmares." Richard nodded, taking a sip of coffee. It was strong, just the way he liked it. They were silent for a few moments, and then he found himself doing something he rarely did. He started a personal conversation. "How do you do it? How do you calm him down so quickly?" The other caregivers, they all gave up. They all said they couldn't. Amanda sat on the other side of the table, holding her own cup of tea. Her dark eyes met his, and there was a seriousness there that contrasted with her youth. "Because I listen to what he isn't saying," she replied simply. "Michael doesn't need someone to discipline him or try to fix him. He needs someone to understand that he's hurting. And when you're hurting, the last thing you need is someone telling you to stop crying." Richard felt those words like a punch to the stomach. How many times had he said exactly that to his son? Stop crying. Be strong. Men don't cry. Words that now seemed cruel, senseless, completely disconnected from what a 4-year-old truly needed to hear. "I don't know how to be a father," Richard confessed suddenly, surprised by his own honesty. "I thought I did. When Michael was born, I was sure I would be a good father. But after Beatrice, after she passed, I just froze. It's like everything I knew how to do had disappeared." Amanda tilted her head, watching him carefully. "You don't need to know everything. Nobody does. But you need to be present. And being present isn't just being in the same place. It's being there with an open heart. It's letting him see that you're also hurting, that you also miss her, that you're also trying to figure out how to move forward." He lowered his eyes to his cup, her words echoing within him like a distant bell. Be present with an open heart. Things that seemed so simple, but that had become impossible when the pain was too great to face. "Did you lose someone too?" Richard asked softly, intuiting that there was something more behind that wisdom. Amanda was silent for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "I lost my parents in an accident when I was 15, she said finally. "I went to live with my grandmother. She raised me, taught me not to be afraid of sadness. She used to say that sadness isn't weakness, it's love that has nowhere else to go, and that we need to find new places to put that love." Richard felt a lump in his throat. Love that has nowhere else to go. That's exactly how he felt. All that love he had for Beatrice, all that love they shared, suddenly had no destination. And instead of redirecting it to his son, he had locked it all inside himself, building walls taller and thicker. "I'm sorry," Amanda said, seeming to realize she had shared too much. "I shouldn't have—" "No," Richard interrupted her. "Thank you for telling me, and for being here." She smiled, and at that moment they heard little footsteps descending the stairs. Michael appeared at the kitchen door, dragging the brown teddy bear by its arm, his hair messy, his eyes still sleepy. When he saw his father sitting at the table, he hesitated for a second. But then Amanda opened her arms and the boy ran to her, climbing into her lap as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Good morning, champ," Amanda said, kissing the top of his head. "Did you sleep well?" Michael nodded, rubbing his eyes with closed fists. Then he looked at his father, still hesitant. "Good morning, Daddy." "Good morning, son," Richard replied, and his voice came out softer than he intended. "Do you want pancakes again today?" Michael's face lit up. "Yes." "And can I help? Can't Amanda make them?" "Of course you can. You're the best helper, remember." And so the routine began, a routine Richard had never experienced. They made pancakes together, Michael standing on the stool, Amanda guiding his small hands to flip the batter in the pan, Richard watching from the side, feeling both included and an intruder. After breakfast, Amanda suggested they play in the garden. The garden Richard barely stepped into, that huge, well-maintained space by hired gardeners, but completely empty of memories. Michael ran across the lawn, his teddy bear flying behind him like a superhero cape. Amanda followed, him laughing, pretending she couldn't catch him. And Richard stood on the veranda watching, feeling something strange grow in his chest. Something he had forgotten existed. Lightness, joy, the simple and profound feeling that maybe, just maybe, life could still be good. "Daddy, come play!" Michael shouted from afar, waving his little arms. Richard hesitated. He had work to do, reports to review, emails to answer. His mind was already listing all the obligations, all the reasons why he couldn't just run around the garden like a child. But then he met Amanda's gaze. She said nothing. She didn't need. To her eyes said it all. Choose. You can choose. Work or sun, numbers or laughter, past or future. And for the first time in a long time, Richard chose differently. He descended the veranda steps and walked onto the lawn. Michael looked at him with surprise, then with pure, unrestrained joy. He jumped into his father's arms, and Richard caught him in the air, spinning him around, feeling the light weight of that little body, hearing the unrestrained laughter that seemed to heal wounds he didn't even know he had. They played. They really played. They ran, rolled in. The grass chased butterflies, found ladybugs, pretended to be airplanes, built imaginary castles. Amanda participated when called, but most of the time she stayed aside, watching, smiling, letting father and son reconnect without interference. When the sun began to get too strong, they went back inside. Michael was sweaty, his face red, his hair stuck to his forehead, but happy. Completely happy. Amanda prepared a light snack, and they ate together at the kitchen table, talking about silly things, unimportant things, things that were actually all that mattered. In the afternoon, Amanda suggested they paint. She spread old newspapers in. The living room brought washable paints, brushes, rollers, and 3 white canvases, one for each of them. Michael threw himself into the activity with enthusiasm, painting what looked like a green dog with purple ears. Amanda painted delicate flowers, using soft colors, precise movements, and Richard stood there looking at the blank canvas, completely lost. "I don't know how to paint," he confessed, feeling ridiculous. "Nobody needs to know how," Amanda replied. "You just need to feel." Feel. What a strange concept. Richard had spent his entire life thinking, analyzing, calculating. Feeling seemed like foreign territory, dangerous, unpredictable. But he picked up the brush, dipped it in blue paint, and began to apply it to the canvas without thinking much, just doing, letting his hand move, letting the colors mix, letting something inside him express itself in a way that words never could. When they finished, the 3 canvases were hung side by side on the living room wall, Michael's green dog, Amanda's delicate flowers, and Richard's canvas, which was a chaos of blues and greens and yellows, without a defined form, but somehow honest, true. A window into a heart that was beginning to open. Night fell quickly. Amanda prepared a simple but delicious dinner, pasta with homemade tomato sauce and meatballs. Michael ate 3 portions, proud of himself. After dinner, Amanda bathed the boy, put on clean pajamas, and read a story before bedtime. Richard stood at the bedroom door, watching, listening to her soft voice narrate adventures of dragons and princesses and brave knights. When Michael finally closed his eyes, Amanda slowly left the room, leaving the bedside lamp on. In the corridor, she found Richard still there, standing with an expression she couldn't decipher. "He's sleeping," she whispered. "I know, I just wanted to thank you." "For everything?" Amanda shook her head. "You don't need to thank me, this is my job." "It's not," Richard said firmly. "This goes far beyond any job. You are saving my son. And maybe you're saving me too." She was silent, clearly not knowing what to say. Then she just smiled, that small, sincere smile, and went downstairs to tidy the kitchen. Richard stayed there for a few more minutes, looking at the closed door of his son's room, feeling something grow inside him, something he couldn't fully name. Gratitude, yes, but also something else, something deeper, something that scared him and filled him with hope at the same time. On Sunday, Richard made a decision. He wasn't going to work. He wasn't going to open his laptop. He wasn't going to check emails. He was going to spend the entire day with his son and with Amanda. He was going to be truly present for the first time in so long. They went to the park, a huge park in South London with lakes, ducks, playgrounds, and lots of green space. Michael was ecstatic. He ran from one toy to another, went down the slide, swung on the swings, crossed wooden bridges, fed the ducks with bits of bread Amanda had brought in a small bag. Richard sat on a bench watching, and Amanda sat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance, but present. They sat there in comfortable silence, just watching the boy play, listening to his laughter mix with the laughter of other children. "He's different," Richard said finally. "In just 3 days, he's completely different. How is that possible?" Amanda took a moment to respond, as if choosing her words carefully. Because someone finally looked at him and said, "It's okay. It's okay to feel what you're feeling. It's okay to be scared, to be angry, to miss someone. You don't have to be strong all the time. You can just be a child." Richard turned to look at her, truly look at her. She was in profile, the gentle wind stirring some loose strands of hair, her eyes fixed on Michael, who was now trying to climb a tree with the help of other children. There was something about her that fascinated him. It wasn't beauty in the conventional sense, although she was beautiful in her own way. It was something more, a quiet strength, a wisdom that didn't come from books or degrees, but from life lived, from pain faced, from love that refused to give up even when everything seemed lost. "You're very young to be so wise," he commented. Amanda laughed, a light, genuine sound. "I guess life doesn't ask our age before teaching us the hard lessons." "True." Richard was silent for a few more seconds, then asked, "And you? Do you have anyone? Family? Boyfriend?" He didn't know why he was asking that. It wasn't his business, but he felt a strange curiosity, a need to know her beyond the role she played in his home. "I have my grandmother," Amanda replied. "She's in a nursing home now. She's 83, and her memory isn't the same anymore, but she still recognizes me when I visit her. As for a boyfriend, I had one, but it didn't work out. He wanted a life I couldn't give him. Parties, trips, things that cost money I don't have. So we broke up." "I'm sorry," she shrugged. "It was for the best. I'd rather be alone than with someone who doesn't understand who I really am." Richard felt a strange pang in his chest. Admiration, respect, and perhaps something more, something he wasn't ready to name. Michael ran up to them at that moment, interrupting the conversation. He wanted to show them a flower he had found, a white daisy with delicate petals. Amanda praised the discovery as if it were the greatest treasure in the world, and Richard found himself smiling, genuinely smiling, for the first time in so long. They returned home late in the afternoon, tired but happy. Michael slept in the car, his head resting on the teddy bear, his mouth slightly open. Richard drove slowly, avoiding sudden stops, wanting to prolong that moment of peace. Amanda was in the passenger seat, looking out the window, lost in thoughts he couldn't guess. When they arrived home, Richard carried his sleeping son to his room, gently placed him in bed, and covered him with the duvet. He stayed there for a few minutes, just watching, feeling his chest tighten with a mixture of love and regret. How much time had he wasted? How many nights had he let pass without giving a good-night kiss? How many opportunities had he let slip away? But there was no point in looking back. The past couldn't be changed. What mattered was now, and now he had a second chance, a chance he wasn't going to waste. He went downstairs and found Amanda in the kitchen, preparing a jug of orange juice. She looked at him and smiled. "I think he'll sleep through the night. It was a busy day." "It was a perfect day," Richard corrected. She lowered her eyes, seeming embarrassed by the compliment. Richard approached, leaning his hands on the counter, trying to find the right words. "Amanda, I want you to know that you're not just a caregiver, you're changing our lives, his life, my life. and I don't know how to thank you for that." She looked up, and there was something there he couldn't decipher. Surprise, shyness, or perhaps something more. "I'm just doing what I think is right," she said softly. "Michael is a special boy. Anyone would see that." "That's not true. 15 people saw and gave up. But you didn't give up. You stayed. And that makes all the difference." There was a moment of silence between them, laden with something neither of them knew how to name. Then Amanda went back to filling the jug with juice, ending the moment before it could become something more. Richard went up to his room later, lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling for hours. He thought of Beatrice. He thought of how much he had loved his wife, how much he still missed her every day. But he also thought of Michael, and he thought of Amanda. And for the first time since Beatrice had passed, Richard allowed himself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, life could still offer something new, something different, something that wouldn't erase the past, but would build a possible future. On Monday morning, Richard woke up determined. He wasn't going to the office, he was going to work from home. He set up his laptop in the living room, on a makeshift table, from where he could see Michael playing with Amanda. They built blocks, creating colourful castles that were later knocked down with joyful laughter. Richard participated in video calls with investors, but always with an ear attuned to what was happening in the next room. In the afternoon, Amanda brought Michael to him. "Daddy, do you want to come play with us?" the boy asked, his eyes hopeful. Richard looked at the computer screen, full of complex spreadsheets and numbers that suddenly seemed insignificant. Then he closed the laptop. "Of course I do." And they went to the garden. They planted flowers together, digging the earth with their hands, laughing at the dirt that stuck to their fingers, choosing vibrant colors that would soon transform that green space into a real garden. Michael worked seriously, his tongue between his teeth, concentrated on making each little hole the perfect size. And Richard beside him felt that he was planting more than flowers. He was planting memories. He was planting love. He was planting roots in a life he had almost destroyed. Amanda watched them from afar, sitting on the veranda steps, a gentle smile on her face. And Richard, dirty with earth, with his son beside him and the warm sun on his back, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt complete, not completely healed, not completely free from pain, but complete in the sense that, for the first time, he was whole, present, alive, and all this thanks to a young woman who had entered his life in the most improbable way, bringing with her not just professional care, but something much greater. She brought hope. She brought light. She brought the reminder that even in the deepest ruins, it is still possible to find seeds of a new beginning. The following weeks unfolded at a pace Richard had never experienced. For the first time since he founded his company, he began to decline meetings. He delegated projects. He started leaving the office on time. And some afternoons, he simply didn't show up, working remotely from home to be close to his son and Amanda. His partners found it strange. His employees whispered. But Richard didn't care. Something inside him had changed irreversibly, and he had no intention of going back. Michael continued to transform every day. The closed, aggressive, and frightened child who pushed away all caregivers now ran around the house with contagious energy. He talked non-stop, asked 1,000 questions, laughed loudly, hugged tightly. He had started drawing again, singing, inventing stories, and most importantly, he had started to trust again, in Amanda mainly, but little by little also in his father. Richard observed all this with a mixture of gratitude and something more complex, something he tried to ignore, but which grew every day like a stubborn plant that insists on sprouting even in the cracks of concrete. It was the way Amanda cared for Michael, the way she understood every cry, every fear, every joy, the way she transformed ordinary moments into precious memories. But it was also something beyond that. It was the way she smiled when she thought no one was looking, the way she hummed old songs while cooking, the way her eyes shone when she told stories, the way she existed in that space, filling voids he didn't even know he had. On a Thursday night, after Michael finally fell asleep after a particularly busy day, Richard and Amanda met in the kitchen. She was preparing chamomile tea, and he had just closed his laptop after a virtual meeting that ran longer than expected. They sat at the table, each with their steaming cup, and were silent for a few moments, just appreciating the quietness of the house. "He asked about her today," Amanda said suddenly, breaking the silence. Richard looked up, knowing exactly who she was talking about. "Beatrice?" Amanda nodded. "He wanted to know if she was proud of him, of the drawings he made, of the flowers we planted. I told him yes, that she was always watching, always rooting for him, always sending love from wherever she was." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. He was silent for a long time, distractedly stirring his cup, watching the golden liquid swirl in small eddies. "I don't talk about her with him," he confessed finally. "I know I should, but every time I think about trying, the words get stuck in my throat. It's like talking about her makes everything more real, more definite." Amanda observed him with those dark, understanding eyes. "But it is already real, Mr. Alistair, and it is already definite. Not talking about her won't bring her back. It will only make Michael feel that his mother is a forbidden subject, something that needs to be hidden, and that will make him hide his own pain too." Richard swallowed hard. He knew she was right. He always had. But admitting it meant facing something he had been avoiding for 2 years. "How do you do it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "How do you manage to talk about loss so naturally? Doesn't it hurt?" "Of course it hurts," Amanda replied softly. "It always will hurt, but pain doesn't have to be an enemy. Sometimes pain is just love that has nowhere else to go. And when we accept that, when we talk about it, the pain lessens. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes more bearable. Love that has nowhere else to go." She had said that before, and that time, the words had touched something deep inside him. Now, hearing it again, Richard felt something stir in his chest, a wall beginning to crack, a door he had kept locked beginning to open. "I loved Beatrice," he said, the words coming out almost against his will. "I loved her so much that sometimes it hurt. I met her in college. I was a poor engineering student, full of dreams and no money in my pocket. She came from a wealthy family, could have had anyone, but she chose me. She used to say I had fire in my eyes, that she saw something in me that no one else saw." Amanda remained silent, just listening, giving him space to continue. "We built everything together. The company, the house, our life. When Michael was born, Michael thought I was complete, that nothing could be better than that. And then she passed. Suddenly, without warning, without time to say goodbye, to say everything I still wanted to say. And I just didn't know how to go on. So I dove into work. I pretended that if I worked hard enough, the pain would go away, but it only got worse, and Michael paid the price for that." His voice faltered at the end, and he had to stop, taking a deep breath, fighting back the tears that threatened to overflow. Amanda reached across the table and lightly touched his wrist. It wasn't a romantic touch. It was a touch of compassion, of humanity, of someone who understood. "You didn't fail, Mr. Alistair," she said firmly. "You did what you could with what you had at that moment, and now you're here, trying again, being better. That's what matters." Richard looked at her hand on his, that light but comforting touch, and felt something inside him finally break. The tears came. They weren't dramatic or scandalous tears. They were silent, slow, liberated. Tears he had held back for so long that they had become a part of him. And now finally they could flow. Amanda said nothing. She didn't try to console him with empty words. She just stayed there, her hand still on his wrist, her presence saying everything words couldn't. And in that moment, in that kitchen, illuminated by the soft light of the lamp, Richard felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt seen, understood, not judged. When the tears finally ceased, he wiped his face with the back of his hand, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I didn't—" "You don't need to apologize for feeling," Amanda interrupted gently. "Never." They stayed, there for a few more minutes, drinking the tea that had already cooled, immersed in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. and when they finally got up to go to sleep, something had changed between them. A barrier had fallen. A new intimacy had emerged. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something that could become love if they allowed it. Richard went upstairs, entered his room, and lay on the bed, but couldn't sleep. His mind was agitated, full of thoughts that tumbled over each other. He thought of Beatrice, he thought of Michael, he thought of Amanda, and for the first time he didn't feel guilty for thinking about her. He didn't feel like he was betraying his wife's memory, because Amanda wasn't trying to replace anyone. She was just being who she was, and who she was saving not only his son, but him too. The next morning, Richard made a decision. He was going to take Michael and Amanda on a trip. Nothing too far, just a weekend at a country estate hotel in the Surrey Hills, a few hours from the capital, a place where Michael could see animals, run freely, breathe fresh air, and where he, Richard, could be away from work, away from distractions, completely present. When he told them the idea at breakfast, Michael exploded with excitement. "Are we going to see cows, and horses, and chickens?" "We're going to see all that and much more," Richard promised, smiling. Amanda hesitated. "Mr. Alistair, I don't know if it's appropriate for me to come along. This seems more like a family trip, and I'm just—" "You are family," Richard interrupted her, and then stopped, surprised by his own words. But they were true. Somehow in a few weeks, Amanda had become an essential part of that broken family. "Yes, you'll come. Michael will want you there, and I want you there too." Her face flushed slightly, but she nodded, accepting. They left on Friday afternoon, as soon as Richard managed to dispatch the last urgent meetings. They travelled in a different car this time, an SUV that Richard had rented especially for the occasion, more spacious and comfortable. Michael was in the back seat, singing children's songs Amanda had taught him, completely euphoric with the adventure, and Richard drove calmly, without rushing, enjoying every moment. The country estate hotel was exactly as promised. Rustic, welcoming, surrounded by green fields and leafy trees. There was a small stable with horses, a pen with chickens and ducks, a vegetable garden where guests could pick fresh produce, and a lake where it was possible to fish. Michael could barely believe so much wonder all at once. They spent the afternoon exploring. Michael fed the chickens, petted a gentle horse named Thunder, chased ducks, laughed until he couldn't anymore. Amanda accompanied him in everything, always attentive, always present, but also letting him explore, discover, and be enchanted. And Richard followed a little behind, taking photos with his phone, capturing moments he knew would never be exactly the same again. At night, after a hearty dinner on the hotel veranda, overlooking the stars that shone in a clear sky without light pollution, Michael finally collapsed from exhaustion. Amanda took him to the room, bathed him, put on his pajamas and read him a story until he fell asleep. When she returned, she found Richard still on the veranda, sitting in a rocking chair, looking at the sky. "He's asleep?" Richard asked, without taking his eyes off the stars. "Like a log. It was an intense day for him." Richard nodded, and Amanda sat in the chair next to him, also looking up, at that vastness dotted with light. They were silent for a long time, just rocking gently, listening to the crickets chirping and the whisper of the wind in the trees. "When was the last time you looked at the stars?" Amanda asked softly. Richard thought for a moment. I think since before Beatrice passed. We used to do that. Sit in the garden at home, look at the sky, make up stories about the constellations. After she passed, I couldn't anymore. It was too painful. And now? Is it still painful?" Richard took a while to answer, letting the question hang in the air, seeking honesty within himself. "It still is, but it's a different kind of pain. It's a pain that no longer paralyzes me. It's a pain I can feel and still continue living. I think that's what you were trying to teach me. That feeling isn't weakness. That remembering isn't betrayal. That I can honor the past without being trapped in it." Amanda smiled in the dark. "You're learning fast." "I'm trying. For Michael. And for myself, too." There was another silence, but this time laden with something different. A mutual awareness, an attraction that neither of them knew how to handle, but which was there, undeniable, growing every day, with every conversation, with every shared look. "Amanda," Richard began, his voice hesitant, "I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it without it sounding wrong." She turned to face him, her face half hidden by the dim light, but her eyes attentive. "You can say it. I'll understand." Richard took a deep breath, gathering courage. "When you arrived at my house that night, I thought you were just another caregiver, another person who would spend a few days and then give up, but you didn't give up. And it wasn't just that. You brought something back into that house. You brought light. You brought warmth. You brought life, and I don't know what Michael and I would do without you, and that scares me. Because I don't want to depend on anyone again. I don't want to open my heart and then have to face another loss. But at the same time, I can no longer. Imagine what it would be like to live without you around." The words came out rushed, confused, vulnerable, and when they finished, Richard felt completely exposed, as if he had stripped off all his armor and stood there, naked and unprotected, awaiting the verdict. Amanda was silent for a moment that seemed to last an eternity, and then, with a voice so soft he almost didn't hear it, she replied, "I also don't know what I would do without you both. When Mrs. Teresa called me offering this job, I almost refused. I was scared of not being good, enough of not being able to help, of failing like all the others. But when I arrived and saw Michael, when I looked into his eyes and saw all that pain, all that loneliness, I knew I had to stay. Not for money, not for work, but because something inside me recognized something inside him, and inside you too. And now I don't know anymore where the job ends and something else begins. Something I can't name. Something that scares me, but that also makes me feel alive. For the first time in a long time, alive." Richard felt his heart quicken. He turned completely to her, his eyes searching for hers in the dim light, and there, on that veranda under the stars, with the whole world sleeping around them, they truly looked at each other, without masks, without defenses, just two wounded hearts trying to find a way back to the light. Richard slowly, hesitantly, raised his hand and lightly touched her face. Amanda closed her eyes for a second, leaning into the touch, and when she opened them again, there were tears there. But they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of relief, of acceptance, of permission to feel something she had been denying herself. "I can't promise I won't be afraid," Richard whispered. "I can't promise it will be easy. But I can promise I will try, that I will be present, that I will honor this, whatever this is." Amanda smiled through her tears. "That's all I need. Effort, presence, honesty." And then, there, under that starry sky that seemed to witness a sacred moment, Richard leaned in and kissed Amanda. It was a soft, almost shy kiss, full of hesitation and fear, but also full of promise. A kiss that didn't erase the past, but opened a door to the future. A kiss that said, "I see you, I recognize you, and I'm willing to risk my heart once more." When they separated, they stayed there, foreheads touching, breaths mingling, hearts beating in sync. And for the first time in a long time, Richard felt something he had forgotten was possible. He felt hope. Not just hope that everything would be all right, but hope that maybe, just maybe, he could be happy again, that he could love again, that he could build something new without betraying the memory of what was. They slowly went back inside, hand in hand, stopping at the door of Michael's room. Richard went in alone, approached the bed, and watched his son sleep, the teddy bear hugged tightly, his lips forming a smile even in his dream. He leaned down and gently kissed his forehead. "Thank you for giving me another chance," he whispered. "I promise I won't waste it. I promise I'll be the father you deserve. And I promise we'll be happy again. All of us." He left the room and found Amanda waiting in the corridor. She extended her hand and he took it, intertwining their fingers. They walked up to their own rooms, which were side by side on the second floor of the hotel. They stopped at her door, knowing they had to say goodnight, but not wanting to. "Good night, Amanda," Richard said, gently squeezing her hand. "Good night, Richard," she replied, and it was the first time she had called him by his first name, without the formal Mr. And somehow, that small change meant everything. He watched her enter her room and close the door, and then he entered his own room, closed the door behind him and leaned. Against it, his eyes closed, his heart still racing. Something had changed that night, something fundamental. A line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. There was only forward. A new path, uncertain, frightening, but also full of possibilities he barely dared to imagine. He lay on the bed and, for the first time since Beatrice had passed, Richard slept in peace, without nightmares, without guilt, just with the serene feeling of finally having found his way back home. And this home wasn't a place. It was a feeling, it was belonging. It was the certainty that, no matter what happened from then on, he was no longer alone. He had his son, and he had Amanda, and together, the three of them could face anything. The morning sun entered the windows of the country estate hotel like a gentle invitation to a new day. Richard woke up feeling something different. It wasn't just the lightness of a good night's sleep, but something deeper. It was as if a weight he had carried for years had finally been lifted from his shoulders. He got up, showered, and went down for breakfast, where he found Michael and Amanda, already sitting at the table, eagerly discussing plans for the day. "Daddy!" Michael shouted when he saw him, waving enthusiastically. "Aunt Amanda said we can ride real horses today." Richard smiled, sitting beside them. "Really? And you're not scared?" Michael shook his head vigorously. "No, Thunder is very gentle, and Aunt Amanda will be with me." Richard looked at Amanda and their eyes met. There was something new there, an intimacy that hadn't existed before, a silent understanding. She smiled and he felt his heart quicken slightly. How was it possible that in such a short time this woman had become so essential? After breakfast they went to the stable. The stableman, a grey-haired gentleman named Mr. Joseph, prepared 2 gentle horses, one for Michael and Amanda to ride together, the other for Richard. Michael was radiant, his eyes shining with excitement as Amanda helped him up, positioning herself behind him, holding the reins with one hand and wrapping her other arm around the boy. Richard mounted his own horse, and together they began a slow ride through the fields. Michael talked non-stop, pointing to every flower, every bird, every detail of the landscape, and Richard observed not only his son but also Amanda, the way she held Michael securely, the way she answered every question with infinite patience, the way her hair swayed in the wind, loose and free, the way she seemed to belong there, in that moment, in that life. When they returned to the hotel, it was already noon. They had a delicious homemade meal prepared by the hotel owner, and then Michael asked to go to the lake. They took improvised fishing rods, and the 3 of them sat on the bank trying to catch something, without much success but laughing at their frustrated attempts. It was there, in that moment of absolute peace, that Michael uttered something that changed everything. "I like you, Aunt Amanda." She smiled, stroking his hair. "I like you very much too, champ." But the boy continued, with that brutal honesty that only children possess. "I wish you could stay forever. I wish you were my new mummy." The silence that followed was heavy. Richard felt the air leave his lungs, not knowing what to say. Amanda stood completely still, her eyes wide, clearly taken by surprise. Michael continued to look at her, waiting for an answer, not understanding the gravity of what he had just said. Amanda swallowed hard, choosing her words carefully. "Michael, you know your mummy will always be your mummy, right? She's in heaven, watching over you, loving you very much. Nothing and no one will change that." "I know," Michael replied, his voice small but firm. "But she's not here anymore. And I miss having a mummy I can hug. And you take care of me like a mummy does. You make yummy food, tell stories, play with me, give me cuddles. Can't you be my mummy too?" Amanda looked at Richard, silently asking for help. But he was as lost as she was. How to explain to a 4-year-old that the world wasn't that simple, that love and family were complex concepts, full of layers and nuances, that even wanting something with all your heart, sometimes it wasn't possible to simply turn desires into reality. Richard moved closer and knelt beside his son. "Michael, what you're feeling is very important," he said softly, "and it's okay to feel that. But Aunt Amanda has her own life, her own family. We can't just—" "Why not?" Michael interrupted him, and tears began to form in his green eyes. "Why can't I have a family again? Why do I have to be without a mummy forever? It's not fair." His voice rose, and suddenly he was crying, sobbing, letting all that pain he still carried finally come to the surface. And Richard, seeing that, felt his own heart break into pieces, because his son was right. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. A child shouldn't have to go through so much loss, so much pain, so much loneliness. Amanda pulled Michael into her lap, hugging him tightly, letting him cry against her shoulder. And as she held that trembling little body, she also cried silently, tears streaming down her face as she gently stroked his back in circular motions. "Hey, champ," she whispered after his crying subsided a little. "Look at me." Michael lifted his wet face, his eyes red and swollen. Amanda held his little face with both hands, wiping away his tears with her thumbs. "You're right. What happened to you isn't fair. And I can't replace your mummy, because she was unique and special, and will always have her own place in your heart. But do you know what I can do? I can be here, I can take care of you, I can love you in my own way. And if you want, if your daddy agrees, I can be part of your family. Not as a replacement for anyone, but as someone new who has come into your life to stay." Michael looked at her with renewed hope. "Really? Do you promise you won't leave?" Amanda looked at Richard, and he saw the same question in her eyes. A question that wasn't just about remaining as a caregiver. It was about something much bigger, much deeper. It was about commitment, about building something together, about transforming that fragile new connection into something solid, lasting, real. And Richard, looking at the two of them there, Michael in Amanda's lap, both looking at him with hope, with need, with love, knew there was no choice to make. Or rather, the choice was already made. Perhaps it always had been, since that first night when he had come home and found his son sleeping peacefully in her arms. He stood up and approached them, kneeling on the grass to be at their height. He extended his arms and wrapped them in an embrace, the three of them together, forming a perfect circle of connection and love. "She's not leaving," Richard said, his voice choked. "If it's up to me, she's never leaving, because she has become a part of us, and we have become a part of her." He felt Amanda tremble slightly and knew she was crying too. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of something being healed within her too. Because she, as Richard would discover later, was also broken. She also carried wounds that had never been fully treated, and that improvised. Family was healing not only Michael and Richard, but her too. They stayed there for a long time, embracing, letting that moment transform them. And when they finally separated, there was something different in the air, a certainty, a silent promise, a commitment. The rest of the day passed in a blur of joy and lightness. Michael was radiant, jumping from side to side, making plans about everything they would do together when they returned home. And Richard and Amanda exchanged glances, sharing shy smiles, still processing the magnitude of what had happened. At night, after Michael finally fell asleep, exhausted from so much emotion and activity, Richard and Amanda met again on the veranda. This time there was no hesitation. Richard extended his hand, and Amanda took it, letting him pull her closer. They sat together on the same swing, their bodies touching, their fingers intertwined. "Are you sure?" Amanda asked softly. "Sure this is what you want? Because if it's just for Michael, if it's just because you think he needs a maternal figure—" "It's not just for him," Richard interrupted her, turning to face her. "It's for me too, Amanda. I've spent the last 2 years of my life buried in work, running from feelings, pretending that if I ignored the pain it would simply disappear. And then you appeared. And suddenly, for the first time in so long, I started to feel again. I started to live again. I started to believe that maybe life still had good things in store for me. And yes, I'm scared. I'm terrified of losing again, of opening my heart and then having to face another loss. But I'm even more terrified of the idea of letting you go, of letting this chance at happiness slip away again." Amanda closed, her eyes taking a deep breath as if absorbing every word. "I'm scared too," she confessed. "I'm scared I won't be enough. That one day you'll wake up and realize you're trying to replace your wife with me and that I'll never measure up. I'm scared that Michael will grow up and reject me, realizing I'm not really his mother. I'm scared of building something here and then having it all fall apart." "Then let's be scared together," Richard said, caressing her face. "But let's try anyway, because the alternative of not trying, of letting fear win, is much worse." And then he kissed her again. But this time it wasn't a shy or hesitant kiss, it was a deep kiss, full of promise and commitment. A kiss that sealed a pact, a kiss that said, "I choose you. I choose us. I choose this uncertain but possibility-filled future." They returned to London on Sunday afternoon, the three of them together, singing in the car, making plans, building memories. And when they arrived home, that house that once seemed so empty and cold, it already felt different, warmer, more welcoming, more alive. The weeks that followed were filled with adjustments and discoveries. Richard officially offered Amanda not only the job of caregiver, but a permanent place in their lives. She accepted, but insisted on maintaining her independence, on having her own room, on not rushing things. And Richard respected that, understanding that building something solid took time. They established routines: breakfast together every morning, family dinners every night, weekends dedicated to outings, adventures, memory-making moments. Richard began to work less, delegating more, prioritizing what truly mattered. And Michael flourished, he grew. He became a real child again, full of life and joy. But there were also difficult moments. Nights when Michael woke up crying, asking for his mother. Moments when Richard felt the guilt return, questioning whether he was betraying Beatrice's memory. Moments when Amanda felt like an intruder, wondering if she had the right to be there. And it was in one of those difficult moments that Richard made his final decision. It was a Thursday night, exactly 6 months after that first night when Amanda had appeared in his life. Michael had fallen asleep earlier, and Richard and Amanda were in the living room, sitting on the sofa, talking about the day. "Amanda," Richard began, his voice serious, "I need to show you something." He got up and went to the office, returning with a polished wooden box. He sat down beside her again and carefully opened the box. Inside were photos, letters, personal items, memories of Beatrice. "I never showed you this," he said softly, "because I was afraid. Afraid you'd think I was stuck in the past. Afraid you'd feel you were competing with a memory. But I realized I was wrong. You're not competing with anyone. And Beatrice will always be a part of me. She will always have a place in my heart. But that doesn't mean there's no room for you too." He picked up a photo of Beatrice smiling, radiant, holding a newborn Michael. She was incredible. Funny, intelligent, full of life. And I loved her. But she's gone. And as much as it hurts to admit, she's not coming back. And I know deep in my heart that she wouldn't want me to be stuck in the past. She would want me to move forward, to be happy, to give our son a life full of love and joy. And that's what you're helping me do." He put the photo back in the box and took Amanda's hands. "So I need to ask you something, and you can say no. You can say it's too soon, that you need more time. But I need to ask, because if there's one thing these past few years have taught me, it's that life is too short to let important things pass us by." He took a deep breath, gathering courage. "Amanda Clark, will you marry me? Not because Michael needs a mother, not because I need someone to take care of the house, but because I love you, because you brought light back into my life, because when I think about the future, I can't imagine a future without you. Do you want to build a family with me? Really?" The silence that followed was long and heavy. Amanda looked at him with wide eyes, tears streaming freely down her face, and then with a choked but firm voice she replied, "Yes." 1,000 times, yes. Richard felt his heart explode with joy. He pulled her into a tight hug, and they both cried together, cried with relief, with happiness, with gratitude for this second chance that life was offering. And then, in a spontaneous decision, Richard got up and went to Michael's room. The boy was awake, sitting in bed, hugging his teddy bear. "Daddy, did something happen?" Richard sat on the edge of the bed and smiled. "Yes, it did. Something very important. And I need to tell you, Aunt Amanda and we're going to get married. She's going to become an official part of our family. Are you okay with that?" Michael's eyes lit up in a way Richard had never seen. "Really? She's going to be my new mummy." "She's going to be Amanda." Richard corrected gently, "Because your mummy, your first mummy, will always be unique. But Amanda will be here taking care of you, loving you, being a part of your life forever." Michael jumped out of bed and ran to the living room, where Amanda was still sitting on the sofa, wiping away her tears. He threw himself into her arms, hugging her with all his strength. "Thank you for staying," he whispered. "Thank you for not leaving." Amanda squeezed him against her chest, burying her face in his hair. "Never, my love, I'll never leave." And there, in that simple yet profound embrace, something was completed. A family that had been shattered by loss found a way to rebuild itself, not by returning to what it was before, because that was impossible, but by creating something new, something different, something that honored the past but embraced the future. The following months were filled with preparations and celebrations. The wedding was simple, just close family and intimate friends, held in the garden of the house that was now blooming with all the flowers they had planted together. Michael was the page boy, radiant in his small suit, carrying the rings with seriousness and pride. And when Richard and Amanda exchanged vows, with Michael between them holding both their hands, there wasn't a single person who wasn't crying. Because that wasn't just a wedding, it was a healing. It was proof that even after the deepest tragedy, it is still possible to find hope. It is still possible to rebuild. It is still possible to love again. Life went on. There were challenges, of course. There were arguments, disagreements, moments of frustration. But there were also laughter, hugs, adventures, precious memories. Michael grew up surrounded by love, safe and happy. Richard learned to balance work and family, understanding that success was not measured only in numbers but in moments lived. And Amanda, that simple young woman who one day arrived with only her kindness and intuition, became the pillar that held everything together. Years later, on a random night, Richard was sitting in the garden watching Michael, now 8 years old, play with his younger sister, a 2-year-old girl who had arrived to further complete that family. Amanda was beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, their fingers intertwined. "Do you remember?" Richard asked softly. "That first night when you arrived?" Amanda chuckled softly. "How could I forget? I thought you were going to send me away the next minute." "Good thing I didn't. Good thing." They fell silent, just watching the children play, hearing their laughter echo through the garden. And Richard thought about how strange and unpredictable life was, how a forgotten cell phone could lead to such a profound change, how an unknown young woman could enter someone's life and transform everything, how love could arise in the most improbable places, at the most unexpected moments. He thought of Beatrice and smiled. He knew deep in his heart that she would be happy. Happy to see Michael growing up so well. Happy to see that Richard had found his way back to life. Happy to see that their love had not ended with her passing, but had transformed, expanded, creating space for new forms of love to coexist. And there in that garden lit by the soft evening light, with his wife beside him and his children playing in front, Richard finally understood what truly mattered in life. It wasn't the millionaire contracts, the professional successes, the material achievements. It was this. It was these simple, everyday, precious moments. It was the sound of a child's laughter. It was the feeling of a hand holding his. It was the certainty that, no matter what happened, he was not alone. It was love, in all its forms, in all its manifestations, in all its miracles. And so, that family that was once broken learn not only to survive but to thrive. They learned that scars don't have to be hidden, but can be honored as proof of battles won. They learned that it's possible to honor the past without being trapped in it. They learned that second chances exist for those who have the courage to accept them. And they learned, above all, that true wealth is not in what we possess, but in whom we love and who loves us back. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Richard, Michael, and Amanda's story has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of rebuilding love and second chances, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment resonated with you the most. Was it Richard and Michael's first encounter in the kitchen? Was it the declaration under the stars? Or was it the marriage proposal? Every day we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, speaking of pain, healing, love, and hope. Stories that remind us that even in the darkest nights, there is always the possibility of a new dawn. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another narrative that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on what truly matters in life.